Right now, I don't think crypto needs more growth. I think it needs more discipline. The user experience when it comes to security is broken.
It is really miraculous to see how much of the real world finance problems we've actually already solved and just don't know it because we're not speaking the same language.
Mehdi Zerouali is the co-founder and director of Sigma Prime,
one of the best blockchain security and research firms in the world.
We also have Zach Obront, co-founder of Etherealize,
a new initiative to help traditional financial institutions adopt blockchain technology.
Give us an overview of the 1 trillion security initiative.
You want to have 1 billion users store on average $1,000 on Ethereum, and you also want to have a single institution storing $1 trillion in a smart contract.
The killer app is the most boring stuff imaginable.
The boring things are the good things. Hey everybody, this is Mitchell Amador and this is the Immunefi Show, and today we have something really exciting for you guys. We have Mehdi Zerouali here, the co-founder and director of Sigma Prime, in my view, one of the best blockchain security and research firms in the whole world, with a lot to show for it in that time. And we also have Zach Obront, the co-founder of Etherealize. Did I say that correctly, Zach?
Etherealize.
Etherealize. Okay, we're verbifying it.
That
sounds much more powerful. And the two of them are doing really good work. Etherealize is a new initiative trying to help as much of the global financial infrastructure move onto Ethereum as possible. Together, they and other members of the security community are doing something really, really important right now. They're working on the 1 trillion security initiative with the Ethereum Foundation. And of course, if you can imagine what that means, we're talking about a key unlock for moving incredible amounts of value and incredible amounts of financial and economic activity onto Ethereum as a result. So welcome, you guys. Great to have you both. I know a little bit about you. I think your reputation precedes you, but we do want to dive into the details and understand a little bit more about that. So, starting here with, let's start with Zach. I would love to hear who you are, a little bit about your background, how you came to be in this point, how you got here, and why you're excited about doing it.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on. So weird route into security, which it sounds like almost everyone in this space has. I ran a nonfiction book publishing company for most of my 20s, which was pretty much as far from security as you can get. Lots of words, not a lot of tech. I was technical on the side, and I would always try and bring it back. So as the company grew, I'd squeeze in time to say, I'm going to build this tool we need or something else. And the team would just yell at me and say, please don't do that. You have a different job to do. And so as the company got more mature, we had a CEO in place, things were kind of built. I took a year off to focus on kind of indulging more of the technical side of things with the plan to go back, and just had too much fun. So I ended up leaving, thinking of myself as semi-retired, wanted to read as much smart contract code as I could because I was kind of obsessed with it, and discovered security accidentally that way. And basically found it as the perfect excuse to get to deep dive cool technical ideas, which led to doing it a little more, which led to doing nothing but that, which led to just obsessing over it for years. Did that for a few years, the kind of contest bounty world, and started to get more of the builder itch last year. So did a little bit of building. I built OP Succinct, or at least the first version of it, just turning Optimism into a ZK chain using SP1. Once I started talking to Vivek about Etherealize stuff, saw both the incredible amount of missing pieces to really bring institutions on chain, as well as the surplus of interesting technical challenges needed to get over that hump. And so couldn't resist. So I kind of put the founder hat back on and have been focused on building the foundational pieces and then software that we think is likely to bring more institutions on chain for the past year or so.
That's some big expectation setting right there. Okay. That's exciting. Before I asked Mehdi about his background, which I've been curious about for some time, because while I've had the privilege of knowing him, his background remains shrouded in secret. Right? But it may entertain you, Zach, to know that I started Immunefi basically in the very similar way, where I was, taking a break, effectively retired, reading my books especially, and going into my craft. And I got the builder itch, and I was just convinced that all the pieces in the security stack that needed to exist didn't exist. And so I did something similar to you, and I ended up becoming Immunefi as a result. Although I'm sure Etherealize is going to be much bigger and more exciting than that. So
I wouldn't say that, but it is magical when something like that happens. You can feel when a business comes from being kind of drawn from the needs of the market, where Immunefi is an amazing example of just immediate clear fit, crazy fast adoption, and it clearly is the right mix of founder, idea, market, all those things coming together.
You caught me unawares there with your compliment. Very surprised. Right, I caught that. I was like, that hits too deep. I can't take it. Okay, We could go down that rabbit hole. We will go down the parts of that rabbit hole. Before we go there, I might have planned this whole thing just to dive into Mehdi's background. I gotta ask, Mehdi, give us the deets. How did you come to be
Sure.
there? The whole shebang.
Sure. So I wasn't retired when I started Sigma Prime, unlike you two. Yeah, look, man, I've been in the security industry for about 15 years. I studied telecommunication engineering in France, and then there's a lot of computer science, networking, signal processing, lots of maths, had lots of fun. And then I got to take a year to study in Sweden for the Europeans on listeners. The Erasmus program got me to Stockholm for a year, and I got to pick my courses, which was pretty crazy. My university in France allowed me to do that. And I just happened to pick 90% of my courses to be security courses. So I just fell in love with hacking and security. I was, I think, 21 around that time. And I knew back then that this was what I was going to dedicate my professional life to. So that's what I did straight after uni. I joined a Big Four firm called EY. I know, right? I used to wear suits every day, believe it or not. So I did that for 6 years. I worked for these guys for 6 years, 3 years in Paris. And then I relocated to Sydney, where I've been now for about 11 years. And I was essentially doing what we call penetration testing. So trying to break systems, trying to find flaws in our clients' websites, networks, mobile apps, and so on. Got to do a lot of fun stuff, social engineering, red teaming, got to dress up as, flower delivery person to break into banks and drop, little devices that would give me control of their network and laptops. So I had lots of fun. And then Ethereum came out, and kind of like Zach, started to become really obsessed by this thing. It's kind of like the only thing I could think of outside of work, and to be fair, sometimes during work hours. So I was really obsessed by Ethereum. We're talking about 2016. 2015, 2016. So I started doing a lot of research, understanding the EVM. Shout out to Martin Swende, who back then was putting together heaps of blog posts explaining certain edge cases on the EVM and how to find bugs in smart contracts and whatnot. And I was just fascinated by this new world. So what I ended up doing was go to my boss at EY and say, hey, man, I think there's a clear opportunity here. I'm passionate about this thing. How about you enable me to spin up a team within our team to tackle blockchain security? And that person, I'll never forget the words that came out of his mouth, said, I don't believe in your stupid internet money. I'm like, okay, cool. Thanks for that. I quit about 2 months after that and started Sigma Prime with my friends. This was about 9 years ago. Sigma Prime is entering its 10th year, and we celebrated our 9th anniversary a couple of days ago. So yeah, it's always funny to look back at these things now that, these massive Big Four consultancies are getting into the space. And I have a lot of, meetings with like EY partners around the stuff that I was pitching 9 years ago. So that's kind of how I got into it.
That's a great background. Now, when you started there with the whole lead up, France, Sweden, security courses, signal breaking, I was like, oh my God, was Mehdi a spook? Mehdi was a spook. But no, it's even worse. He was a consultant.
Oh, as a consultant, yeah, I know. Wearing suits, flying around the whole continent in Europe and even Africa. It was painful, but it was lots of fun as well.
Can you imagine the world if EY went all in on blockchain security in 2016? Like if the whole world was oriented around like that's who auditors were.
Yeah, that I find it hard to conceive, but yes.
Well, I think you did a great effort by trying to pull them in, and clearly your intuition was right on the money. You had a front row seat to probably one of, if not the most exciting area in security over the last decade. You helped contribute to that. You'll create amazing technologies in the process. Yeah, and you really, if we think about the best possible applications for your security skill set, what do you have? You probably have maybe some advanced military technologies that are on the bleeding edge of distributed networks, and then you have blockchain, and you got to go and be there for that whole run. So impeccable timing. Well done.
Cheers. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so that's backgrounds. Maybe I'm going to have more questions for you, but I'll save them for the next time we meet, and then expect you. Zach, you too. I'm big into books. I don't know if you know, I read a lot of weird stuff, but we'll save those things for next time, because today we're going to talk a little bit about how we're going to keep the Ethereum ecosystem safe. Now, I think people have heard about the $1 trillion security initiative, but I don't think that anybody who's not involved in it or really directly adjacent on the security side has a lot of understanding of it. And even for those of us who are in the security industry, and unless we're kind of institutional in some way, where we're engaged with these projects in some capacity, it can be difficult to grasp all the nuances. Someone can be a very, very good smart contract auditor and know very, very little about wallet security, know very, very little bit about the underlying infrastructure which supports all blockchains and traditional Web 2, know very, very little about the kind of social or the policy angle that makes a lot of things work. So give us an overview, and this is an open thing towards both of you guys, really, since I know that both of you guys have thoughts and expertise on this subject. Give us an overview of the 1 trillion security initiative and help us understand what it means to be an ecosystem steward.
I can start with the zoomed out, and then Mehdi will have lots of specifics to add, I'm sure. But basically, like, the genesis for this, at least my understanding from the EF, is that like there's a ton of incredibly talented security researchers at the EF, and most of them have an area where they are focused, right? There's lots of client security, there's all kinds of things there. But there's something that happens both within an organization and honestly in the whole ecosystem where like the areas that have focus get more and more focused, that it's helpful to step back and say, like, actually, what are all the things we're trying to solve here? And are there areas we're just not looking at all? And so some folks from the EF basically launched that analysis of let's step all the way back. Let's take in all the feedback and say, put aside what you think security is supposed to be. What is getting in the way of either institutions putting large sums of money on chain or a large number of individuals keeping some money on chain? And like, let's step back all the way back to that problem and paint what are all the things that are in the way, which there's a lot of them, right? And then we can start to narrow down into the areas that are least focused on that maybe need the most focus. But just approaching it that way is such an unlock in that there's, I think, areas that don't get discussed a lot, but that come up when you approach the question kind of as a blank slate versus the very critical work that we've all been doing for a long time, but that stays kind of on the track of the things we expect security is supposed to be. So this ended up bringing in a lot of conversations about UX and privacy and, like you said, underlying Web 2 infrastructure and all these things that now become a part of the problem space to look at. And so a lot of the process so far has been that analysis and that prioritization. And now we move more into the phase of trying to pick the most high priority, under-focused on things and trying to do whatever we can to move them forward.
Would it be too much to say that you guys are kind of building an open Ethereum skunkworks or kind of Bell Labs for targeting this hardest security problem from first principles of how do we bring the whole world on chain? Would that be a bridge too far?
Maybe in that, like, I think like the EF has an approach to these things, which is like not to say we're going to build the team to do everything, but to try to be the center that can put focus and resources and funds towards things without everything living in house. So like I could see a world where it would be effective to say the Bell Labs, the skunkworks of that, let's bring it, let's do it all. The EF's approach is much more, if we can identify the problems and do the high level thinking of what the right solutions might be, then maybe there are people external that we can support more in order to get there, or grants to put out to kind of bring people in to work on these problems. And so it's not quite as far as like, this is going to be a huge team. I think this is going to be a relatively small team, but focused on basically turning the ecosystem into that skunkworks.
Sure. And for a little bit of context on for everybody else who might not be familiar with why that model is so sense-making, and it sounds, at least from my perspective, really effective. Jens Porup, who was the CISO over at Bear and before them was Avalanche, he had a really good way of looking at it when he said, the best way to do security is to kind of centralize it in your most knowledgeable expert person and then crystallize that into policies that you can put out to the rest of the world that doesn't have enough time or space or attention to go and think about what are really difficult and sticky problems. And it sounds like you guys are cracking a way to do just that across the whole stack. So very exciting. Mehdi, Zach said he went the high level. What are the details? Break it down specifically. Like, what are you guys working on?
Yeah, okay. So I just want to say as well, before we dive into the details, that there's a common misconception that the EF should be responsible for fixing security for Ethereum. And that's obviously not the case, right? This is everyone's responsibility. It's a common challenge that we have to tackle together. And also, why is it called the $1 trillion security? We didn't necessarily have much way into the naming process, but you can see it two ways. You want to have 1 billion users store on average $1,000 on Ethereum, and or you also want to have a single institution storing $1 trillion in a smart contract, right? So hence the name of the initiative. So it was started in May 2025. So it is managed and led by Frederick Svantes and Josh Stark. Frederick is the head of the Ethereum protocol security team, and Josh is part of the Ethereum leadership. And they decided to bring on board 3 stewards: Zach, Sam CZ Son, who I hope doesn't need any introduction, and yours truly. And what we've been doing is at first trying to conduct a series of interviews and essentially just get input from the community, from users, exchanges, institutional actors, etc., understanding their main pain points when it comes to security. security. And the overwhelming response was that the user experience when it comes to security is flawed, is broken. So that led to the first sub-initiative of the 1TS initiative, focusing on UX security. What does that mean concretely? We're talking about blind signing. Bybit was an unfortunate reminder to the whole world that these things can happen to even the largest institutions and organizations. So we're focusing on that. It has a lot of different aspects as well. When you talk to mainstream folks who aren't power users of the chain, you realize very quickly that they're not really equipped with the tooling required to actually interact with the chain, right? So, making transactions for the three of us is something that we've been doing for maybe a decade, very familiar with things like wallet extensions, et cetera, et cetera. But say if I were to pitch this great DeFi protocol to my friend who hasn't heard of Ethereum, well, there's going to be a lot of friction to get them to use the app. So we're contemplating also establishing standards and even building or finding a team that will build a wallet for the masses, right? So that's something I'm quite excited about. And that's something that I'll be spending hopefully a lot more time on in the coming weeks, months. So there's a report that came out, the first report that came out a couple of months ago, which kind of summarizes the findings that were surfaced through these interviews and this data collection exercise. And we got basically 6 areas. User experience, as I mentioned, smart contract security, infrastructure and cloud security. Again, looping back to what you guys were mentioning about the Web2 bridge, the consensus protocol. I will talk about that a bit later, perhaps. Everything around monitoring, incident response, mitigation, things like that. And as Zach was saying, this is a great exercise because you get to step back and look at certain things that weren't your priority over the past decade. And one of them is social layer and governance, and making sure that Ethereum's open source governance is bulletproof. And we can talk about that a bit later, perhaps. So the choice was made to try to tackle these 6 areas sequentially, at least for now. So let's focus on user security, user experience when it comes to secure handling or secure interactions with the chain. And then we'll dive into the next one. So I foresee this initiative to last well over 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I think it'll be a continuous process. And I'm super excited to be part of it.
Okay, there's a lot there. Now, going back to what both of you guys have mentioned in different ways is the kind of community involvement. So you guys are not doing this in a silo. Each of you run your own organizations already. Sam Son also does his own thing. And this idea of kind of doing it via the community with the EF as a coordinating function as opposed to as a centralized hub. I think that's going to interest a lot of people because it'll be news that there are ways to get involved. We have tons of great security researchers on Immunefi. If they wanted to get involved and help you guys out in some way, is there a way that they can do that? What would make
Absolutely,
sense, guys? Like,
I can take this, Zach, unless you want to jump in. Okay, so the first step, the data collection exercise, was already pretty critical, right? And as we were saying before we started recording, you guys have helped us. By you guys, I mean Immunefi has helped us quite significantly by sharing some data that is quite unique to Immunefi. Like Immunefi has obviously all these submissions and has been collecting all these submissions over time, and it's very interesting to look at where the crits are, right? How likely is a project to have received a high severity or a critical submission and things like that. So I interviewed a bunch of people, so they'll recognize themselves if they're listening. Thanks for their time. And so that's step 1, is really understanding the pain points from security researchers and users. The second step is what we're currently working on, is really defining projects for people to be able to contribute to. I'll give you one example. And this is perhaps part of the debate, whether it's user experience or infrastructure and cloud security, but let's see. Front ends, right? Verifiable front ends. So over the past 18 months, unfortunately, we've lost a lot of money to threat actors that have been exploiting bugs that have nothing to do with the Web3 stack itself, right? Those bugs aren't necessarily on chain. I'm talking about DS hijacking, S3 bucket hijacking, and things like that. So when you visit your favorite DeFi website, DApp, how can you guarantee that what you're interacting with is essentially what you're intending to? And that's a big question. It's a very interesting technical challenge. And the Ethereum Foundation is in the process of putting together an RFP, a request for proposal, right? And it'll be like, hey, community, we have this problem. How about, if you're interested, submit potential proposals, solutions on how to tackle this problem, and we'll potentially fund you. Obviously, the main requirement here is for the tooling to be free and open source. right? I think that's very important to stress out because we started seeing a lot of these tools emerge over the past couple of weeks. And unfortunately, they're not open source. And go even further, they're not even free to use. So I won't name names, but I'm sure you'll recognize the product I'm talking about. So that's the challenge that we're facing, I think, as a whole, as an industry, is how do we incentivize the production, the development of tooling that should be free and open source, right? Because, if there's not a token attached to it, chances are people might not be willing to spend too much time working on it. So unfortunately, if there's no direct monetization strategy, chances are some of the folks, I'm not generalizing, but some people may not be interested, right? So that's a challenge I think we'll be facing. And it's up to us as an industry to perhaps glorify these folks that are spending time, working on things that are really critical for the ecosystem. Free open source tooling, copyleft is, I think, really, really important. So sorry, to answer your question, there will be a series of RFPs that will come out in the coming days, weeks, and I strongly encourage people to respond to those. We also have an email address that you can reach out to, trilliondollar-security@ethereum.org. If you have any ideas, if you see that, perhaps have gaps in our understanding of the security space, of the ecosystem, please let us know.
Do I understand correctly that this is going to be the default operating procedure? And so, if I'm a developer who has got an interest in these subjects, or if I'm a security generalist, I can be following along. And sometime over the next few years, there's going to be one, if not multiple projects that are going to be in my wheelhouse that are going to be targeting frontier challenges that the Ethereum and the on-chain space is facing that I can go and get involved in. And you guys may subsidize, you guys may fund my project along, provided that it's, made for the benefit of the community.
Spot on.
Okay. Please.
The one thing I just wanted to double down on is that last point that Mehdi made. Of all of this starts with saying, let's zoom out and see the things that we weren't previously seeing and listen to as many voices as we can to put that together. But there's lots of things we still missed, right? We didn't talk to every person. And so one lane of this is the lane of what we can see and what we know. And there'll be RFPs and other things. There's also one step back from that, the list of overall problems, where if people have ideas of hey, there's an out there way that I think we could solve one of these problems, it's worth reaching out and proposing it. Because the purpose of this, we are fortunate that the EF has a long-term perspective and just wants what's best for the ecosystem. And so there's no dogma about we have to do this in this order, in this way, with this process. The right idea will rise to the top. And then even a step back from that is are there things that aren't even on that list of problems, but that you think might be problems? And this is a small enough group of people who are focused on this that the right ideas will bubble to the top. So I would just encourage anyone who I wish the entire security ecosystem could just see this one thing and it might be able to change things. It's worth surfacing that because it'll be in front of the right group of people that if there's a possibility, we can do what we can to try to push that forward.
Okay, well, I look forward to you guys launching your barely policed chat room sometime soon to coordinate these harebrained games and discussions that are going to happen. I mean, if you just want to get a bunch of emails coming in too, that's fine. But I got a feeling that this is the kind of thing that's going to bubble up into a Discord space or a Telegram group eventually. So whenever you're ready, you let me know. I'll be there with some bad ideas myself. Let's dive into the weeds. So I think now people have an overview, organizationally speaking, strategically speaking, I guess what the EF is trying to do here and how they're thinking about it and what kind of philosophy or tenets are going into that, some unusual choices. But I do want to dive into some technical matters. It's late 2025, and I'm very curious, now that you guys have done this vast survey, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for all those discussions. What do you guys think are the biggest, security risks that are blocking the process of on-chain adoption today? If we're going to think about what's really blocking us from having $1 trillion in TVL on Ethereum, what is that? And it's okay if you get multiple answers. It's okay if you get different answers. I think the rest of us who are specialists who are trying to solve our different problems, we want that bird's eye view that both of you guys have.
Yeah, I can take the more fewer institutions with bigger dollar amounts perspective, and maybe Mehdi will do the opposite. Fundamentally, it's interesting because having been in this space for a while, but mostly focused prior to this year on protocols that are appealing to retail investors, there's kind of a meme or maybe some assumption that's all the decentralization stuff is nice philosophically, and then users don't really care that much about it. And so like there's this constant trade-off space of like, well, the convenient thing that maybe is a little less secure, people are going to be drawn towards that, and then there's problems that come from that, right? And so I kind of just had this baked in as like solving that tension is an important point, and then started talking to financial institutions, and it is not the case at all. They are so used to the world of extreme focus on counterparty risk and technical compliance and that model of security and really analyzing these things and being more methodical and careful, that it's this huge pool of capital and interested people with an exact focus on all the things that Ethereum is great at, and that had just had this connection that hadn't quite been bridged. And so when we walk in and they're talking about risk of needing the 99999 whatever nines of downtime and or of uptime, you know, real like nation state threat actors against holding real funds in place, like these are things that we are very good at and that I don't think are quite as appreciated by retail. And so I think like there's an interesting dynamic here, which is like a lot of the things that are hard in the Web2 world, we already are getting off the shelf just by building on Ethereum. But then and this is where a lot of the UX and privacy stuff comes to the surface. All the things that they take for granted as easy in that world, privacy is like, there's a counterparty who's just not sharing this. Auth is like whatever auth system you want and you trust and you do it locally. And so there's a lot of infrastructure to build to make these systems check the boxes of what institutions expect as like the easy stuff. And then we just leapfrog because we already have done all the hard stuff. And so that's kind of where a lot of my focus has been on kind of thinking about like, what is the right model for how complex institutions with different stakeholders with different levels of permission can interact with a blockchain in a way that isn't clunky or doesn't feel risky to them. And then I think there's the whole other layer of like, they know that there are DeFi hacks and smart contract hacks, like there are risks here, but they don't have a way to establish, like I'm fortunate as a security researcher to just like audited a lot of things. And I'm like, oh, I know I trust this thing. I know I don't trust this thing. There's no way for them to really have visibility into this. And so there's like a paranoia in interacting with DeFi because it's all kind of painted with the same brush. It's just like, there is DeFi and there are problems with it. There's no ability to parse the differences. So in my mind, on the like big money side of things, I think it's like an ability to interact with the blockchain in a way that doesn't add a whole new set of user experience off risks locally, and an ability to parse out which protocols feel safe for them to use versus which don't.
Two difficult problems. I especially like the latter. I want to double click on that. But Mehdi, taking the other side of that, you know, what are you seeing on the other angle?
So again, from a retail perspective, UX is terrible. It's just not where it should be, in my view, and apparently the view of a lot of survey participants. We can't really expect people to really comfortably deal with seed phrases and understand the concept of like self-custody. It's just, we've tried, right? We've been trying for 10 years and it hasn't really gone anywhere. We've been able to attract a bunch of people and turn them into power users, which is cool, but that's not really what bringing like the next billion of users on chain is about. So I think user experience, focusing on wallets, focusing on social recovery mechanics is really going to be key. You know, we've chatting with Frederick and a bunch of other people on what this could look like. And we believe that a simple mobile first wallet experience could really work, and protecting the user in a way where I'm also like contemplating having whitelisted contracts allowed in that wallet only, right? So this is a big departure from the crypto ethos, if you will, but it's obviously not for everyone, right? These power users that I was referring to, they can still use their favorite Chrome extensions and do things as they're used to. And I think we're working on a process to bridge mobile wallets with hardware wallets as well. So I can't really talk too much about this because it's still like very much in the design phase, but there was this great presentation that was given at DevCon by someone who built this little hardware wallet called Firefly. So if you want to check firefly.app, it's like a super, super cheap little device that you can build for, I think, less than $8. And that's got the potential to really revolutionize how we interact with the chain, in my opinion. So finding a way to pair that with like a mobile friendly experience is, I think, what I'll be focusing on in the next few months, and just really trying to research amongst a lot of other folks, obviously, how to best do that. I, for one, I'm really convinced that once we have a tool that can allow folks to interact with the chain safely, we'll see a lot more of us using the chain.
Mehdi, you make my life difficult. This is a really interesting subject. I was actually just talking to a whole bunch of friends of mine about wallet security and what they can do. especially some people who have, made investments into the space, but then they are not traditional crypto users. They just bet on particular businesses, and then they're going to get tokens, and they're like, what do I do? I'm like, well, there's no problem, man. You just need a 2 of 3 multi-sig, and you have one mobile and then one hardware, and then you do one social. And they're just like, what do any of these words mean? Okay, so we're starting off a low base. That's difficult. And these are brilliant people who are very talented. And I've had this conversation over and over and over again. I would absolutely love to dive deeper into that some other time. Perhaps we should do a wallet special or a special on any number of these things. That is tough, though.
Yeah.
That is tough. I'll just go into the most important part, which is, in your guys' view, thinking of the big picture here, going back to the big picture, we've hit and cleared a lot of the difficult catalysts for growth at this stage. So the UX is bad from a retail perspective, but the products are excellent in the sense that, I can get a better deal on any crypto exchange or any crypto neobank than I will with my funds and on a yield basis, and often on other deals basis than I can get from any traditional banking solution, with a lot less compliance tape at that. So it's a very nice combination. And that's pretty compelling on the one side. And then on the other hand, the ability to access these open pools of liquidity and be able to plug into just like fully formed liquidity for any financial product that you may service to your existing customers is crazy. Like if you're an institutional bank, like say if I look at the largest bank in Portugal, probably be Millennium BCP, they sell stocks, but they don't sell stocks. They're really white labeling Saxo Bank, I think, on the other end of that, which is a version of a front-end application or a neobank that is plugging in to, say, an equities marketplace or like a derivatives engine. It could even be a hypothetically a synthetics product if the volumes are small enough in order to secure all that activity. And to be able to get all that off the shelf is absolutely incredible. And so the products are actually there. They're amazing. The regulatory burdens are not completely done with, but at least we have political allies around the world that are pushing us forward. So I think we're past the point where like, oh yeah, we can be regulated out of existence. That's no longer the case. And security is kind of like one of these, probably the last big challenge, the last really unknown. And then there's all these things, there's all these ways that we could be unlocking, like literally $1 trillion inside of 1 year's time. So what do you guys think is going to be the most probable unlock? If you had to make a prognostication about what the future is going to look like there, where would you make your bets? And I do suspect, right, that you guys are making that bets by virtue of where you're allocating your security efforts.
Yeah, I want to double down on how excellent the products are. It has been fascinating to spend a lot of this year focused on deep mechanics of how finance works in the non-blockchain world, and to see basically how many edge cases are just not considered and are deferred to legal system, trusted entity, whatever. And I guess I have a hard time stating how extreme it is when you talk to people who are operations people or like leading the associations in some of these industries, and they have this sea of problems. And I'm like, DeFi developers 3 years ago banging their head against the wall, we're running into the same problems and solve them in a relatively simple programming model. Like, it is really miraculous to see how much of the real world finance problems we've actually already solved and just don't know it because we're not speaking the same language. And basically there's this chicken and egg thing where it's like those solutions aren't that useful because you can just do edge case exception handling if you're trusting the legal system, but then you don't get all the blockchain benefits. And so there's this gap, and it's a lot of where we're focused is to say like all the blockchain benefits are genuinely compelling. And then we have to basically teach them how to understand that exception handling doesn't work anymore. And this is how we can solve all those things. I've been amazed at how real a lot of the DeFi solutions that we've come up with over the past decade have been. And I'm only really experiencing that this year. In terms of like opportunity for where this goes, I mean, the biggest thing I'm seeing, and again, this is coming from like the Wall Street finance world, is like you have a model with a lot of the market where, you know, like you said, it's like you're buying an equity from your bank, it's going somewhere else. So like you've got these layers. If you're able to speak straight to the core database, don't need to exist. And so there's a lot of interesting, like complicated, regulated plumbing that doesn't necessarily serve a purpose if everyone can trustlessly speak to the real database. And, you know, with like US equities, it's like the database is the DTC. And there is a place that's holding a ledger of ownership of different things. And there's just a lot of layers above that in order to speak to that ledger and to maintain trust, right? Because it's like there is complicated things on timing and all these other things that we have managed to solve that the solutions in traditional finance are add layers of people who are basically ensuring their level until you get to a place where we're not actually working with each other there's counterparties, we're working into a third party that's a trusted entity, all this stuff. But there's also a whole other world of finance where there isn't a DTC, right? They're like, a lot of the world runs on legal agreements and no source of truth. And I think we have an incredible opportunity to become the source of truth for finance that will allow all these efficiencies that we've seen in equities and bonds to exist across all of finance. There are 1,000 problems across finance and truly the rest of the world that come down to there isn't a source of truth. And we've got the ability to create that source of truth for everything.
Well, it's music to my ears, that's for sure. I do want to understand, I don't want to get away from the question of like, okay, so because this is an important one for how you guys are thinking about the future. What do you think if we could make one big security breakthrough over the next 12 months, what would be the most important one to do?
You take this one.
Punting it, just abandoning Mehdi to his fate.
Mehdi, were you able to hear that? What are you thinking?
Well, because of course, due to the nature of our characters, something's got to break. Well, let's hope he comes back, because it would be great to see him. But you got an answer for the question? Do you have a thought? Do you have an opinion?
The most important thing we can do in the next 12 months. $1 trillion
come on board in the next 12 months. What's the security catalyst that unlocks that? There are many options, many choices, but you can only bet on one. You got to put your whole net worth into a polymarket bet on this specific thing. No pressure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a shortcut without knowing the path to get there, but it does feel like the stuff Mehdi was mentioning. If user retail security feels seamless and feels easy, it's the fact that like we already have these products. You're already in the case where probably like this is a better alternative for many people as their core place where their assets live. Applications where you can kind of have a card that you're spending directly from the account, get yield baked into the account. This is a better alternative than my current bank checking account. If like user retail UX and security was improved, then I think there's room for this to just become the default option. It's one of the only things I can imagine just being like a phase shift unlock of, stable coins are regulated. They're paying a better yield than whatever you get in your checking account. And that just, there's a mass migration of capital on chain.
That sounds great. Mehdi, are you back with us? Can you hear us? Well, now we hear you, but you don't seem to hear us. We'll just have to continue on as best we can. Mehdi, you're a hacker. You're an expert. We hear you.
Crazy. Yeah, you would expect the internet connection from WeWork in New York City to be a bit better. I just want to maybe double down on something that Zach touched on. I think we keep thinking that crypto needs institutions. And I would argue it's probably the opposite. Like institutions need crypto more than we need institutions. And the reasons behind that is, as Zach was pointing out, there's so many features that we have inherent to blockchains that would make all these, TradFi managers extremely jealous. Atomic settlement at scale alone is such a life-changing thing for this industry, right? So I don't see institutions as being here to legitimize crypto. I see it as crypto modernizing institutions, if you will. And I think for too long, the narrative was flipped around. Like, because obviously a lot of people care about their bags. It's like, oh, when is TradFi coming? When's the next like big bank or big financial institution coming to pop my bag? And I don't think it's really the right way to look at it. I think we should be building tooling processes that will make the choice very easy for institutions. It'll be like so obvious that this thing exists and they wouldn't be able to sort of ignore it anymore. And I think that's what we should be focusing on.
Sure. I certainly hope you're right. I mean, I think you're right about all those things, but we do want their capital inflows. So they've got something pretty compelling to us to deal with. Let me take this in another direction. I think in my experience, security researchers in general and security talent in general are some of the most creative and industrious people. They tend to be skeptical. They want to get to the bottom of things. They like to think from first principles. They don't want to take things for granted. They often love to tinker and to build. I mean, both of you guys have built stuff, lots of stuff. I look at a lot of the best hackers I've worked with, almost all of them like to build stuff on the side. A number of them have built businesses, especially as it gets easier and easier. And there's a lot of things that, with your guys' industry-wide survey that you're going to see kind of failure points and opportunities, some of which are going to make it into your RFP process, and then some of which probably don't necessarily make the cut or are interesting, but you're not necessarily sure if they're going to be wild. And I'm curious as to where you guys see, new security niches or new security products emerging, knowing that any number of people who are listening to our presentation here may well be those people who can go and act and solve those security problems right now. So where do you guys think people should be looking, people should be focusing attention where these, next security niches could emerge?
Yeah, the biggest thing I'm seeing right now, and you see it in the crypto market even, is just like the focus on privacy is becoming increasingly important. And I think previously there were kind of buckets of like, you've got Aztec or like parties who are all in on privacy is the thing, right? And then you've got the like Tornado Cash, Railgun, okay, how can we have some anonymity while being on a public blockchain? Like you got these buckets, but privacy is such a rich area of priorities. As we talk to institutions, like some of them want privacy that is the same way we think of it in DeFi. Some of them want privacy from the public, but are comfortable sharing things with the counterparty. Some of them want privacy in terms of anonymity. Some want privacy in terms of what's happening. Some want privacy that even the asset that they're trading, it's not clear that it even exists. Like there are all these different constructions, and trying to think of this as like there is a solution to privacy or like there is a way to think about this, I feel like it limits. And as this tapestry starts to fill in, the security for that is challenging and fun, frankly. Like if I was doing security research right now, it's the most fun area because everything is completely new constructions of what the problem space even is and what the bug patterns are. Like this is creative thinking to try to think about what could go wrong with this stuff. And so I think there's like a huge opportunity in really understanding that whole ecosystem and how to think in the right kind of constraints and the risks that are in that world, and kind of stepping to the forefront as like an expert in that is a niche that I think is just going to be growing.
I can't agree more with what Zach said. I do foresee the ZK security space to become a big priority for Ethereum and for the whole ecosystem. And the reason why I think a lot of folks should probably invest their time in learning these primitives and learning how to secure them is looking around, there's really not enough talent to be able to help this massive influx of builders who will be building privacy preserving solutions using these new primitives. It kind of reminds me of where we were at 10 years ago with Solidity, to be quite frank, right? We had a whole heap of builders, not as many obviously, but a whole bunch of people writing smart contracts. And we were just discovering EVM bugs and security patterns and things like that. So safe to say that Zach is doing a lot more building work in the ZK space than I am, but it's my perspective. It really feels like we're 10 years ago in Solidity land. And I, for one, would like us to avoid the same mistakes that we made with Solidity, which is like a dry period of what, like 5 years maybe, where there was like barely, I wouldn't say barely anyone competent, but you get the gist. There was not enough capacity to service the industry. You would come to firms like ours, we'd tell you like straight in the face, yeah, we got a slot for you in 9 months. So I just don't want that to happen with ZK. And I would love to see a bunch of people trained into ZK security primitives. We're doing what we can at SIGP, like training some of our best minds in like learning this stuff, but it has to be a collective effort.
Sure. Well, maybe as a thought for the $1 trillion security initiative, if you guys think that's critical to have, I don't know, some kind of scalable educational path or golden path constructed, because believe me, people are not going to figure it out themselves.
No.
And I have a funny comment. I think we've all been around for a while, or, we have our cypherpunky influences. And for the longest time, I did a lot of public policy stuff in Portugal and Europe, and I've had to go engage with the governments and all that jazz to champion crypto and push its cause. And for the longest time, this privacy thing has had us embattled, right? Like that has been the chief hatchet that has been used to smash me over and over again. I'm like, guys, we're not having this. Like, okay, I need an armor just to deal with the privacy hatchet. And then here we are in 2025. 10 years into that process. And you guys are telling me that the chief unlock, or one of the chief unlocks, de facto implied, I know this to be true because I've talked to my customers who are saying the same things that you guys are telling me right here. And that the chief unlock is privacy between counterparties and conditional and extensible privacy, however you want it, like way more privacy, way more anonymity perhaps not, but way more privacy than anything, the criticisms over the last 10 years could imagine. I don't know, delicious irony is not quite how I feel because I was like brutalized for defending crypto over this issue. So I don't feel like it's delicious, this like painful irony, maybe, that we're coming here and, on the precipice of victory, the best customers in the world are asking us for exactly the thing that crypto was villainized for almost a decade, which wasn't even a true thing, right? It's not even an anonymous system. But so there's a certain irony in there that I'm going to discover how I feel about it later.
Yeah. It's a fascinating space of questions in general, in that like cypherpunk primitives are critical to exist. And there are situations where people need privacy that is not that, right? Like there are lots of things that I don't want disclosed publicly to the entire world that I'm perfectly comfortable with you to know. And like if Mehdi is operating a private permissioned privacy thing that he sees everything, there are things that I'm totally fine putting there that I would rather that than to make it public. And so I think there's just like a whole space of options that need to be filled in. turn this into something more like the internet, right? Like no one is blaming the internet for the fact that it is permissionless. There are things built on top of it, and they have their own sets of trade-offs and ways in which they are possibly like judged or criticized. And that the more we have the full array of options, the more it becomes a question of which of these options do different regulators feel are palatable in which ways, as opposed to just throwing the whole thing in.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense. Not something I could have predicted years ago.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Are you guys going to put your survey findings into some grand and oppressive white paper or report that the rest of us can read?
That's been done, Mitchell.
What?
That's already been done.
Where can we
Yes. So
find it?
let me try to dig that up for you. So if you go to ethereum.org/trillion-dollar-security, you will find a report that you can download in PDF format, print it, put it in your tablet, read it at the beach. And that essentially contains the learnings of that data gathering exercise that we started.
Incredible. Okay, that's great. Being a proper nerd, I'm going to go read a white paper for fun later tonight.
Yeah. It's actually very well written. Not because I I wrote some of it, but I think a bunch of people spent a lot of time to really trying to distill the essence of these conversations, and it's a great read.
Sounds really exciting. My last question for you guys before we wrap here. I have so many to choose from. I think I may try and steal the both of you for 2 separate conversations into the future, because I think we're really just scratching the surface of the work that you guys did, frankly. And a lot of these details are absolutely fascinating rabbit holes that I think people need to hear about. But let's try and inject a little bit of spice into the equation. Something that will get one or both of you questioned by your colleagues for your poor decision-making skills, your poor judgment in choosing to join us here. Contrarian take, something spicy, something difficult. Can be about security, can be about adoption, can be about crypto in general. Give us, a hard-won insight that the world won't understand, but you guys have earned the hard way. You know it in your heart of hearts to be true, and you know it's going to make an impact in our field in the years to come. No pressure. Extra spice, please.
Okay, I've got one which might get me in trouble, but it's okay. Right now, I don't feel crypto needs more growth. I think it needs more discipline.
You're an Australian degrowther, okay.
No, hear me out. I think we're obsessed with growth metrics, and it's really distracting us from what makes this beautiful space valuable. In my view, credible neutrality, resilience, alignment are key. And if we're too focused on growth and not on correctness, incidents will keep on happening. Trust will keep getting eroded, and we won't be able to get to that $1 trillion milestone that we've been talking about and preaching. I'm not saying people should stop building. I'm saying people should start building with more discipline, really understanding that they're not just launching websites. They're launching protocols that will, in some cases, hold people's life savings. So I really would love the industry to really realize that as a collective. There's a lot of pressure from investors, users to launch as quickly as possible with as many features as possible. And I get that. I understand that. But if I were to really wish for one thing, is more discipline, more resilience, focus on correctness.
Gotcha. I won't say it's inspiring because it's like the German school teacher's recommendation, discipline, correctness, but I completely understand. Yeah. Obviously, I see the consequences of incorrectness every single day, and it's pretty tragic. Okay, there's one hard one insight, no more moving fast and breaking things, like play the long game, win big, discipline, correctness, resilience. Cool. Zach, where are you at?
Yeah. So the thing that's coming to mind is I think we're in a funny spot as an industry where probably mostly because of like tokens and that all of the way that capital is aggregated, there's like a sexiness that we want projects to have. And I think it's combined with like a philosophical, like change the world ethos. Like a lot of these things combine to thinking like what this stuff is useful for, almost looking for use cases that feel big and grand. And I guess the hot take here is like the killer app is the most boring stuff imaginable. Right? It's like the very, very base layer of a complicated stack. Almost everything, I mean, we all know this, but if you really like, everything boils down to like, we can share a database that we can trust and all write to it with the right rules. And like, that's a fucking important thing. But I basically like what I see is like so many projects and teams trying to make things sexier instead of saying like, where are the places in the world where they don't even realize that's a problem because it's so boring and at the base layer of the stack that no one's looking at it, but we can replace that base layer and no one will be grateful grateful for it being a blockchain because they don't really even care or know. But as we trickle up the implications of that, it will actually impact their lives. And that doesn't play well in the like crypto world or in the token valuation world, but it plays very well in the like real product market fit of solutions that people would buy without knowing that there's a blockchain attached to it. So I think there's a harm that has come to our ability to actually find product market fit because we want things to be sexy. And there's a shortage. It feels like it's changing, but I hope it continues to change, of teams that are focused on like what's the bare metal product market fit that we need, that even if it doesn't sound impressive or cool, it's what's actually going to like create real upgrades.
Okay. That's an exciting take. So one is build more carefully. The other one is the boring things are the good things.
Build boring things carefully. I think that's the combined ethos.
I think you guys are right. I mean, in every age, there's a few standout products that change the world, but often, the unexpected things that end up making the difference are basic things. For example, in construction, the inventions of new and advanced forms in concrete changed our world. Obviously, finer production of clothing has absolutely changed the world. Crop rotational technologies have been the most impactful thing in terms of human population that drove the rest of technological development over the last few hundred years. And that's super boring, just like timing when you put the seeds in the ground, but that ended up being vastly more impactful than almost everything else in human history. And I think you guys are totally right, and that these are the sexy areas to look at. Guys, remember, for all of you listening, boring things are actually really interesting. Build with discipline, obviously. Look at the privacy solutions that are going on. There's an abundance of opportunities when considering wallet construction. There's lots of work there that's still to be done. There's a bunch of RFPs that are going to be coming from the Ethereum Foundation very shortly that you can get involved in to build freely available open source products and tools that are going to make the difference for protecting the community at scale. And this work is going to go on for years and years and years. And there's this amazing report where they put their initial findings that we'll link to in the show notes here so that all of you guys can see it. Before we wrap up, any final remarks, you guys? I consider this just an intro, if anything, an intro session to $1 trillion.
Yeah, if I may, we were touching on the various ways of contributing and helping with the 1TS initiative. There is actually a job opening if you would like to become a project manager for the $1 trillion security initiative. The Ethereum Foundation is looking for a PM. So I don't have the link handy, I'm sorry, but maybe we can share it somehow when we share this episode. And it's, I think, a fantastic opportunity to really be able to drive meaningful change in the security culture of our beautiful Ethereum ecosystem.
Awesome. Zach, any final comments from you?
I'm all good.
Great. Then we'll grab that link. Hopefully this is just the first of many such conversations with you guys on your continuing adventures here to push the security frontier forward. And that's really what you're doing. You deserve a lot of commendations for that. And I'm going to look forward to reading this amazing $1 trillion security white paper tonight. Thanks to you guys. Okay, everybody, be well.
Thanks for having us.